And to my daughter, my mother's voice rang through the chandelier-lit ballroom, who insists on calling her biggest mistake a husband. The string quartet froze mid-note. Champagne glasses hovered midair. My face burned beneath the spotlights as laughter rippled softly through the crowd. Polite, nervous, cruel. I felt Lucas's hand stiffen in mine. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply stared at the woman who had just declared war in front of 200 guests. My mother, Vivian Drake. Her emerald dress caught the light as she raised her glass higher, that practiced smile never wavering. The same smile that had graced magazine covers for 20 years. The same smile that had taught me to hide every real emotion I'd ever felt. Tonight, she wielded it like a weapon, cutting deep into what should have been the happiest day of my life. The applause came slowly, uncertain. Wedding guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or look away. My new husband's jaw tightened, but his grip on my hand remained steady. That's when I knew, whatever happened next, Lucas would stand by me. Unlike the woman who had just publicly disowned me. I kept my smile frozen until the cameras stopped flashing. When the band resumed playing, I whispered to Lucas, "We're leaving." Vivian's lips curved upward, satisfied. As if she'd won some twisted game only she understood. She didn't know that calm silence was how I'd learned to survive her brand of warfare. We walked past tables of shocked relatives and business associates. My Aunt Claire reached for my arm, but I kept moving. Uncle William's face showed embarrassment, not for me, but for being related to such a public scene. These people had watched Vivian raise me with iron control for 28 years. Tonight was just another performance in her long-running show. Lucas opened the car door without saying a word. He understood that some wounds needed quiet to heal. As we drove away from the country club, I watched the building shrink in the rearview mirror. The last time I'd see it as Vivian Drake's daughter. Tomorrow, I'd wake up as someone entirely different, someone she couldn't control. The city lights blurred past us as we headed toward our small apartment. Our real life. The one she'd never approved of, and now never would. My name is Marissa Drake Collins. I was 28 that night. A data analyst who still believed logic could fix emotion. My mother didn't just raise me. She trained me to win, to dominate, to never need anyone. And then I committed her unforgivable sin. I fell in love with someone who didn't worship money. Lucas taught high school history and coached soccer on weekends. He read books instead of stock reports. He laughed at movies that weren't premieres. When he proposed, he used his grandmother's simple gold band instead of shopping at Tiffany's. Every choice felt like rebellion against everything Vivian had programmed into me. She'd built Drake Holdings from nothing, turning a small real estate office into a multi-million-dollar empire. Her success story was legend in our city. The single mother who refused to let poverty define her daughter's future. But somewhere along the way, success became her only measure of worth. I'd spent my childhood in boardrooms instead of playgrounds. While other kids had sleepovers, I had spreadsheet tutorials. Vivian called it preparation for the real world. I called it prison. Lucas was my first taste of freedom, and she knew it. That's why she had to destroy it. Within a week of the wedding, my cards were frozen, my apartment lease voided. The car I'd driven since college disappeared from the driveway. Vivian's message was crystal clear. You made your choice. Live with it. She'd been planning this punishment long before the wedding toast. Every account, every contract, every convenience in my life had been tied to her name, her money, her control. I'd been so focused on love that I'd forgotten how thoroughly she owned my existence. Lucas found me sitting on our front steps, holding a notice from the landlord. Effective immediately, it read. Lease terminated due to guarantor withdrawal. My mother had co-signed everything, and now she was pulling every string she could reach. We'll figure it out, Lucas said, sitting beside me on the concrete. His calm voice steadied my panic. He'd never had Vivian's money, so he'd never felt this particular kind of helplessness. But he understood loss in ways I was just beginning to learn. That night, we packed everything that truly belonged to me into 2 suitcases. It wasn't much. Most of my life had been purchased with her credit cards, gifted with her approval, marked with her invisible ownership. Starting over meant starting with almost nothing. Lucas and I rented a one-bedroom walk-up in a neighborhood Vivian would have called questionable. I sold my jewelry to pay the deposit. The diamond earrings from my college graduation, the pearl necklace from my 21st birthday. Each piece had come with strings attached, and cutting them felt like surgery. The apartment was smaller than my old closet, but it was ours. No hidden cameras, no surprise visits, no lectures about making the right choices. For the first time in my life, I could eat cereal for dinner without explaining my nutritional strategy. When I landed my first consulting gig 2 weeks later, Lucas framed the check stub and hung it in our tiny kitchen. "Proof that you can build from zero," he said, kissing my forehead. The amount was laughably small compared to my old allowance, but it was mine. Earned, not given. Clean money. That night, I called my old college roommate and told her about the wedding, the freeze-out, the fresh start. She listened without judgment, then said something that stuck with me. "Maybe your mother just gave you the best gift possible, your independence." At the time, it felt like a cruel joke. Later, I'd understand the wisdom. 5 years passed without a word between us. Not a call, not a card, not even a text message. Every birthday felt like a ghost walking through my life. Christmas mornings were quieter, but also lighter somehow. I stopped jumping every time my phone rang, stopped scanning crowds for her familiar figure. Meanwhile, Drake Holdings continued to grow. Vivian's face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The Ice Queen of Real Estate" and "How to Build an Empire Without Apologies." She smiled from every newsstand, the same controlled perfection I'd memorized since childhood. Success had always been her favorite mask. Lucas and I built our own small life. We adopted a rescue dog named Chester who had anxiety issues and loved unconditionally. We painted our apartment walls yellow because it made us happy. We had friends over for dinner parties that lasted past midnight. Simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after my controlled childhood. I started my own consulting firm, specializing in financial audits for mid-sized companies. Word spread about my thorough work and honest reporting. Clients trusted me because I never promised easy answers or quick fixes. Everything Vivian had taught me about numbers, I used to build something she'd never been able to touch, my reputation. The rumor started at a networking event downtown. 2 women in expensive suits were whispering near the bar. "Drake Holdings is under federal investigation." I smiled politely and pretended not to hear, but every nerve in my body sparked alive. After 5 years of silence, her name still had the power to stop my heart. I went home and searched online, but found nothing concrete. Just whispers in industry forums and vague mentions in financial blogs. Someone was asking questions about Drake Holdings' offshore accounts and property valuations. The kind of questions that made powerful people nervous. Lucas found me at my laptop at 2 a.m., scrolling through business websites. "You know you don't have to care anymore," he said gently. But caring wasn't a choice. Despite everything she'd done, Vivian was still the woman who'd raised me. Her destruction would always feel partly like my own. "I'm just curious," I lied. The truth was more complicated. Part of me wanted to see her fail after years of feeling like the failure myself. But another part, the daughter who'd once believed she could earn her mother's love through perfection, still wanted to protect her from whatever storm was coming. A week later, my firm received a new client portfolio that made my hands shake. Internal audit for Drake Property Group, one of Vivian's subsidiary companies. My business partner, Tom, dropped the folder on my desk with a grin. "Marissa, you're the only one experienced enough to handle this level of complexity." Fate had a twisted sense of humor. Or maybe the universe was finally giving me a chance to understand the woman who'd shaped and scarred me. I stared at the Drake Property logo, elegant, expensive, untouchable. Just like her. The audit request came through a law firm I didn't recognize. Anonymous client, they said. Someone with concerns about financial irregularities. They wanted a complete examination of the books going back 3 years. The fee they offered was triple our usual rate. I could have referred the case to another firm. Should have, probably. But something deeper than professional curiosity made me accept. Maybe it was the daughter in me who'd never gotten answers. Maybe it was the woman who'd built her career on uncovering truth. Either way, I was about to dive headfirst into my mother's world again. Tom raised his eyebrows when I told him I'd handle it personally. You sure? This is going to be intensive work. I nodded, already planning my approach. I knew Vivian's methods better than anyone. I'd been watching her manipulate numbers since I was 12 years old. Opening the encrypted files felt like archaeology, digging through layers of my family's financial DNA. Offshore accounts in 3 different countries. Asset valuations that shifted depending on who was asking. Purchase dates that didn't match property records. Every inconsistency told a story, and I knew the author's style by heart. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Money flowing in circles, properties bought and sold to shell companies, profits appearing and disappearing like magic tricks. It was sophisticated, elegant, and completely illegal. Classic Vivian, breaking rules with style. My old bedroom had overlooked her home office. During high school, I'd done homework while she worked late into the night, her calculator clicking like a metronome. She'd taught me to read financial statements the way other mothers taught daughters to braid hair. Now those lessons were helping me unravel her crimes. The most damning evidence was hidden in a subsidiary file marked development projects. Properties purchased for millions, then immediately appraised at double their value. Insurance claims for damages that never happened. Tax credits for charitable donations to organizations that existed only on paper. I printed everything, organizing the evidence into neat piles on my kitchen table. Chester watched from his bed, sensing my tension. Lucas brought me coffee and asked no questions. He understood that some puzzles had to be solved, even when the answer might destroy you. The deeper I dug, the more familiar the patterns became. She was using the same risk algorithms I developed during my internship 7 years ago. The summer before my senior year, when I thought we were finally working as a team, I'd designed a model for predicting property values in emerging markets, proud of my sophisticated mathematics. Vivian had praised my work, called it brilliant and revolutionary. Then she'd filed it away and never mentioned it again. Now I understood why. She'd been using my formula to manipulate property assessments, hiding her illegal profits behind my legitimate research. The betrayal felt fresh even after all these years. I'd been so hungry for her approval that I'd handed her the tools for my own destruction. Every fake valuation, every fraudulent report carried traces of my mathematical fingerprints. She'd stolen my work and used it to build an empire of lies. Lucas found me crying over the spreadsheets. "What is it?" he asked, rubbing my shoulders. I showed him the formulas, explained how she'd twisted my honest research into something criminal. "She didn't just cut me off," I whispered. "She stole from me first." But anger was clarifying. For years, I'd wondered if I was wrong about her. If maybe I'd been the ungrateful daughter she'd claimed. Now I had proof that her cruelty ran deeper than disappointment. It was calculated, deliberate, and had been going on much longer than I'd realized. The anonymous tipster turned out to be Harold Morrison, one of her former accountants. He called me directly after somehow getting my number, his voice shaking with nervous energy. "I heard you were handling the Drake audit," he said. "There are things you need to know." We met at a coffee shop across town. Harold looking over his shoulder every few minutes like a man expecting to be followed. He'd worked for Vivian for 8 years before his conscience finally won over his paycheck. "She thinks she's untouchable," he said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Maybe she used to be." The drive contained emails, internal memos, and recorded phone conversations. Vivian's voice giving explicit instructions to inflate property values, hide income from taxes, and create false documentation for federal loans. Her words were calm, professional, and completely incriminating. "Why now?" I asked Harold. He looked down at his coffee, aging 10 years and 10 seconds. "My daughter just started college," he said quietly. "I can't look at her knowing I helped steal from families who trusted us. Some things matter more than money." I thought about my own relationship with Vivian, how money had been her language of love and control. Harold's daughter would grow up with a father who chose honesty over comfort. She'd never know how lucky she was. Friday night, rain poured against our windows when Lucas said softly, "Marissa, there's someone at the door." His voice carried a warning I didn't want to understand. I walked to the front window and looked out through the security peephole. Vivian stood on my small porch, drenched to the bone. Her usually perfect hair hung in wet strings around her face. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. For the first time in my 33 years, she looked completely human, vulnerable, desperate, afraid. My hand froze on the deadbolt. 5 years of silence stretched between us like a canyon. 5 years of building a life she couldn't touch, becoming a person she couldn't control. Now she was here, soaked and shaking, probably knowing I held the keys to her destruction. Lucas appeared beside me, his presence steady and grounding. "You don't have to let her in," he said quietly. "Whatever she wants, you don't owe her anything." He was right, of course. But the woman on my porch wasn't the powerful Vivian Drake, who'd cut me off without mercy. This was just a frightened mother who'd run out of options. I opened the door. She stepped inside, water pooling around her expensive shoes on our cheap linoleum. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The silence felt heavy with years of unsaid words. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize. She didn't even really look at me. Instead, she stood in my tiny living room like a fish out of water, taking in the second-hand furniture and discount store decorations. "They're tearing my company apart," she said finally. "I need your help with the data analysis. I know you have access to the files." So she knew. Of course she knew. Vivian had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Except this time her intelligence network had delivered news of her own destruction. She'd come to me not as a mother seeking forgiveness, but as a CEO trying to salvage her empire. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, falling back on basic politeness. She nodded, following me into the kitchen where my college diploma hung next to Lucas's framed check stub. Her eyes lingered on both, probably calculating the distance between my small achievements and her massive failures. I filled the kettle, my hands surprisingly steady. Years of therapy had taught me to recognize her manipulation tactics, but they still felt familiar as an old song. The way she stood just slightly too close, invading personal space. The way her eyes cataloged everything in the room, looking for weaknesses to exploit later. "How did you find my address?" I asked. She almost smiled. "I never stopped keeping track of you, Marissa." I couldn't. We sat across from each other at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd organized the evidence of her crimes just hours before. Steam rose from our cups like incense between us. "You built your business using my mathematical models," I said calmly. "Now you want me to clean up the mess they helped create." Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. Good. Fear looked strange on her face, like an expression she'd never learned to wear properly. "I taught you everything you know about finance," she said. "I made you who you are." "Yes," I replied. "You did. And now I'm good enough to destroy you." The words hung in the air between us. She set down her cup, finally meeting my eyes directly. "I'm still your mother," she whispered, and for a moment I heard the woman who'd read me bedtime stories before success consumed her soul. "Yes," I said. "That's the tragedy." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Maybe I had, with truth instead of palm. Lucas appeared in the doorway, checking on us without interfering. He'd learned to read my signals over 5 years of marriage. Right now, I was holding my own. After Vivian left, Lucas asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Are you really going to help her?" We stood in our kitchen, the space still feeling contaminated by her desperation. Rain continued drumming against the windows like an interrogation. "I'm going to do what she taught me," I replied, surprising myself with the clarity of my decision. "I'm going to play by the rules better than she ever did." He studied my face, reading the determination there. "This isn't about helping her, is it?" I shook my head. "It's about finishing what I started. She used my work to build her house of cards. Now I'm going to use my work to bring it down properly." The audit was already nearly complete. I had enough evidence to bury her 10 times over. But rushing to judgment would be sloppy, and I'd learned to value precision over speed. If I was going to destroy my mother's empire, I'd do it with the mathematical elegance she'd taught me to admire. Lucas pulled me into his arms, understanding flooding his eyes. "You're not just auditing her company," he said. "You're auditing your entire childhood." I nodded against his chest, feeling the weight of 33 years settling into place. Some equations take decades to solve. I spent the next week compiling the audit report with surgical precision. Every number was triple-checked, every discrepancy documented with supporting evidence, every conclusion backed by unshakable mathematics. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no room for appeal or interpretation. The pattern of fraud was breathtaking in its scope. Over 7 years, Vivian had systematically inflated property values, hidden income from federal taxes, and claimed credits for charitable donations that never reached their intended recipients. The total amount exceeded $15 million. But the real crime was deeper than money. She'd betrayed the trust of families who'd invested their life savings in her projects. Elderly couples who'd believed her promises about secure retirement communities. Young families who'd mortgaged their futures for homes in her developments. I included every victim's story in the appendix, their names and faces giving human weight to the cold numbers. Harold Morrison had provided contact information for 12 families who'd been directly harmed by her schemes. Their testimonies would ensure that this wasn't just a financial crime, but a personal betrayal. The final report was 247 pages of mathematical proof that my mother was a criminal. I printed 3 copies and sealed them in separate envelopes. One for the law firm that had hired me, one for my files, one for the federal authorities who were already circling. When the audit findings went public, the headlines were brutal. Drake Holdings faces federal inquiry. Real estate queen built empire on lies. $1 million fraud scheme uncovered. Vivian's carefully constructed image crumbled in real time across every news platform. I watched the coverage from my office, feeling strangely detached from the destruction I'd authored. Tom brought me coffee and sat quietly while reporters dissected my mother's empire piece by piece. "Any regrets?" he asked finally. "Just one," I said. "That it took me this long to see her clearly." The phone rang constantly, reporters wanting quotes, competitors smelling blood in the water, clients wondering if they could trust an auditor who destroyed her own mother. I let it all go to voicemail. This wasn't about publicity or revenge. It was about justice, pure and mathematical. By noon, 3 board members had resigned from Drake Holdings. By evening, 2 major investors had pulled their funding. Vivian's empire was bleeding money faster than her accountants could count. The woman who'd taught me that image was everything was watching hers crumble on live television. I drove home to find Lucas cooking dinner, Chester wagging his tail like nothing had changed. "How do you feel?" Lucas asked, searching my face for signs of remorse or triumph. "Like I finally told the truth," I said. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Vivian called 3 days later, her voice cold and controlled despite the chaos consuming her company. "We need to talk," she said. "Dinner tomorrow. The Riverside Club." The same restaurant where she'd once lectured me about making smart choices. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a black suit like she was attending her own funeral. The dining room was nearly empty. Word had spread quickly through our social circle about her legal troubles. Former friends were practicing the art of selective blindness. "You always wanted to prove you were smarter than me," she said without preamble, cutting into her salmon with mechanical precision. Around us, the few remaining diners pretended not to eavesdrop on the conversation that would be gossip gold for weeks. "No," I answered, meeting her cold stare directly. "I just wanted to prove I could be free." For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of prosecution or bankruptcy, fear of irrelevance. The woman who'd controlled everything and everyone was finally facing a problem that couldn't be bought, intimidated, or manipulated away. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Money? A public apology? Your old job back?" I almost laughed. After 33 years, she still didn't understand that some people couldn't be purchased. I visited her penthouse a week later, using the key she'd given me during college, and never asked back. Moving boxes filled the living room where she'd once entertained senators and governors. The portraits of her success lay stacked face down like defeated soldiers. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city she'd once commanded like a personal kingdom. "They froze everything," she said without turning around. "The accounts, the properties, even my personal assets. 25 years of work, gone in a week. I joined her at the window, seeing the city from her perspective for the first time. From up here, people looked like ants, their problems invisible and insignificant. No wonder she'd lost touch with human consequences. Power was the ultimate isolation chamber. The federal prosecutor wants to make an example, she continued. They're talking about 15 years minimum. Her reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, more fragile than the woman who'd raised me with iron expectations. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. Not sorry for the audit or the consequences, but sorry for the person she'd become. Sorry for the mother-daughter relationship that had never existed beneath her need for control. She turned to look at me, studying my face like a puzzle she'd never solved. Are you? Her attorneys withdrew the following Tuesday. Her business partners cut all ties by Friday. Vivian Drake, the woman who'd once been called untouchable by Forbes magazine, now stood completely alone in the wreckage of her empire. The federal investigation expanded daily. Harold Morrison had provided evidence of similar schemes in 3 other cities. The FBI was interviewing former employees, examining bank records, building a case that would probably put her away for the rest of her productive life. I found myself checking the news obsessively, watching her destruction unfold in real time. Part of me expected her to find some brilliant escape, some legal loophole that would let her rise again like a phoenix. She'd always been too smart, too ruthless to be brought down by simple justice. But the evidence was mathematical, undeniable, precise. Numbers didn't lie or accept bribes or change their testimony under pressure. For once in her life, Vivian faced an opponent she couldn't manipulate, the truth, documented in her own hand. Lucas found me reading court documents at midnight, my laptop screen casting blue light across our bedroom. She's really going to prison, I said, the reality finally sinking in. My mother is going to die in federal custody. He held me while I cried for the woman she could have been, the mother I'd never had, the relationship that had died years before I'd ever thought to mourn it. I went to see her one last time before the arraignment. She was staying in a small hotel downtown, having been evicted from the penthouse when the property management company learned about the federal charges. The contrast was jarring. Vivian Drake in a room with polyester curtains and a broken ice machine down the hall. I have a proposition, I said, sitting across from her in the hotel's sad excuse for a lobby. You'll need a compliance advisor for the restructuring process. Someone who understands your business model and can work with the federal monitors. Her eyes widened, searching my face for the trap she was certain existed. You'd do that? After everything? I'm not you, I said simply. I don't destroy people for sport. The job would pay well, and more importantly, it would let me control how her empire was dismantled. I could ensure that the employees who depended on her kept their jobs. The investors who trusted her could recover something from the wreckage. The families she'd cheated could receive compensation. Why? She asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Why would you help me now? Because someone has to clean up your mess, I said. And I'm the only one who understands it well enough to do it right. Over the next 6 months, I worked to save what could be saved from the collapse of Drake Holdings. Not for her, for the people she'd employed, the families she'd promised security, the communities that had trusted her vision for their future. The smaller investors, mostly retirees who'd put their faith in her reputation, recovered 60 cents on every dollar lost. The employees received severance packages and job placement assistance. The charitable organizations that had been used as tax shelters received actual donations to compensate for the fictional ones in her records. Everything she'd once called beneath her notice became my primary focus. The human cost of her greed, the collateral damage of her ambition. For the first time in my life, I understood what ethical business practices actually looked like when applied consistently. The work was exhausting but satisfying in ways my mother had never taught me to value. Each family that kept their home, each employee who found new work, each organization that received real funding felt like a small victory against the cynicism she tried to instill in me. My company's reputation grew during this period. Word spread about the auditor who'd exposed her own mother's crimes, then stayed to clean up the mess with unprecedented thoroughness and honesty. It was the kind of legacy Vivian had never understood, built on trust rather than fear. The exposé aired on national television 6 months after her arrest. The fall of an empire traced Vivian's rise from poverty to power, then her spectacular collapse when her own daughter's audit brought everything crashing down. My company's logo appeared in the closing credits, the firm that had uncovered it all. They interviewed Harold Morrison, who spoke about his decision to become a whistleblower. They interviewed some of the victims, families who'd lost their savings to her fraudulent schemes. They even tried to interview me, but I declined. This wasn't about my story, it was about accountability. The documentary painted Vivian as a cautionary tale about unchecked ambition and the corruption of power. They showed clips from her old interviews, her confident assertions that success was the only metric that mattered. The irony was perfect and devastating. Lucas and I watched it together in our living room, Chester sleeping peacefully between us. "Do you think she'll see it?" he asked. I shook my head. "She's in federal custody. No cable TV." But I knew the story would reach her eventually. In prison, everyone knows everyone else's business. The program ended with a shot of her empty penthouse, windows dark against the city skyline. A monument to the empire she'd built on lies and lost to truth. The daughter she'd tried to control had become the architect of her destruction. Weeks later, she requested a meeting through her lawyer. We sat across from each other in the visitor's room of the Federal Detention Center, separated by thick glass and connected by phones that made our voices sound tinny and distant. She wore an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller, older, more human than the power suits that had once defined her image. Her hair was gray at the roots, her face free of the makeup that had been her war paint for 25 years. "Why didn't you destroy me completely?" she asked, her voice barely audible through the cheap phone connection. The question had been haunting her, I could tell. She'd expected total annihilation, not the careful reconstruction I'd engineered from her ruins. "Because I wanted you to see what real rebuilding looks like," I said. "Not built on lies or stolen from others. Built honestly, from the ground up." She studied my face through the glass, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time since I'd grown up. "I taught you to be ruthless," she said finally. "But you chose to be kind instead." "I chose to be free," I corrected. Everything else followed from that. She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. For 33 years, she'd tried to make me in her image. In the end, I'd become something she could never be myself. Today, I run a consulting firm that specializes in helping people rebuild after corporate fraud. My clients are whistleblowers, victims of financial crimes, and small businesses trying to recover from the damage caused by people like my mother. The work is challenging and meaningful in ways I'd never imagined possible. Vivian serves her sentence in a minimum security facility 3 states away. We exchange letters occasionally, careful, polite communications that dance around the ruins of our relationship. She's teaching a financial literacy class to other inmates, using her knowledge to help rather than harm for the first time in decades. I don't hate her anymore. That emotion required too much energy, took up too much space in my life. Instead, I thank her. Not for the pain she caused, but for the strength I discovered in surviving it. For teaching me, through negative example, what kind of person I wanted to become. From the ashes of her control, I built something she'd never understood was possible. A life based on truth, connection, and purpose beyond profit. An existence where love wasn't conditional on performance, where success meant sleeping peacefully at night. Chester still greets me with unconditional enthusiasm every evening. Lucas still frames our small victories on the kitchen wall. We're discussing adopting a child, creating the kind of family neither of us had growing up, building something honest and lasting from absolutely nothing. Sometimes freedom looks like destruction. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like staying to clean up the mess. But it always looks like choosing your own path, regardless of who tries to stop you. I chose myself. Finally, completely, irreversibly. And that choice made all the difference.